Hi folks, Steve Huda here with eXp Real Estate, and we're here today to talk a little bit about waterfront buyer mistakes. Yeah, I've seen a lot of waterfront buyer mistakes over the years. I've been doing this now for 17 years, so let's jump right into it. Now, most of you came here as a result of chainvalues.com. That's the written version, PDF version of what I'm about to talk about. But if you would like to get this information, a little longer version in writing, just go to chainvalues.com and sign up there, and we'll send this report right out to you. Now, the first thing to talk about is work with an experienced waterfront realtor. Obviously, that sounds very cliche, but buying a waterfront property is much different than buying a rural property, a property in the city, or a subdivision property, okay? Because there's so many nuances that affect how much a waterfront property is worth that you really want to be aware of all of these nuances so that you can come up with the correct value and the correct type of offer to make on a waterfront property. And the trick is that an experienced agent will have insights into each transaction that you look at for a comparable when you're trying to figure out the value of a waterfront property. Now, many times, in fact, almost every time, there's little nuances that affect the value of a property, and only an experienced waterfront realtor would be able to tell you what these nuances are. Now, every realtor goes to the same school, takes the same classes, and they all say they're waterfront experts. The challenge for you is which agent really does have experience so that you pay the correct amount, you pay a fair market value for the property you buy, and you get an offer written with the correct contingencies given that it's a waterfront property. So, it's really important, again, that you hire an experienced agent. Now, the next thing I'd like to talk about is aspirational pricing, okay? And the trick with that is that a lot of times waterfront properties are priced based on what the seller thinks the property is worth. We call that aspirational pricing, okay? And there's been many examples of that, especially on the Waupaca chain. What's happening is waterfront property values have escalated tremendously over the last 2 to 5 years. So people look around, sellers, and they go, "Oh, geez, we saw this one sold for X, so ours must be worth Y." And sometimes that's just not true. So again, you need an experienced agent to help you figure this out, because you need an experienced agent's insights into what a property is worth. Now, I'll give you a quick example. There was a property, and I'll use some general numbers here because I don't want to be critical, but there was a property that was listed very much higher than what it was worth. And it sat on the market for a little while, 4 or 5 months, and then somebody went in and they offered $600,000 less than the asking price. Now, if another buyer before that had gone in and offered $200,000 or $300,000 less than the asking price and bought the property, they would have overpaid by $200,000 or $300,000 more than what the property was probably worth. So again, it's really important that you study, learn, use an experienced agent that has insights on what's going on the Waupaca chain so that you don't drastically overpay. Again, you don't want to be the one that pays a seller's aspirational pricing ideas. Okay, now, what you really want to know is you want to know what the real market value for a property is, okay? So you want to get a fair price, and right now, you're probably not going to get a super low price below market value on a waterfront property because there just aren't that many for sale, and the numbers like I said, have gone up drastically over the last 2 to 5 years. So what you want to be able to do is look at the value of a property, again, with a good agent, and figure out the nuances that are affecting the price, because again, you could be overpaying by $50, $100, $200,000 more than the property is really worth. Next, you want to be very careful and make sure you have a home inspection on a waterfront property. Now, a lot of properties on the chain started out as little fishing shacks, and then over the years they were added on to, improved, extended, moved up, add a second floor added. And sometimes these things were done way back before there was much waterfront zoning, or they were done without permits, or they might even have been done by the homeowner themselves. So what you want to make sure of is that you have a home inspection to find all the things that might be wrong with all the additions and all the modifications that have been made over the years. All right. An example is I just did a waterfront transaction, and when the buyer went in, which was only a couple years ago, the buyers went in, they did not have a home inspection. Now, probably because the market was hot at that point in time, they wanted to make sure their deal got approved, got accepted, so they went ahead and they made an offer without a home inspection. A couple years later, now they're selling, the market's a little different. The new buyers asked for a home inspection, and holy cow, it came back with a ton of defects, which means that the buyer could ask the seller to fix these things. In the end, we got the deal done after negotiating all these things, but it would have been much wiser if the buyer, owner at the time who became the seller, had asked for a home inspection going in when they first bought the property. So again, home inspections can be really important on a waterfront home. And again, there's lots of nuances that come into these inspections, because sometimes they have shallow well point, we call them sand point wells. Sometimes they're built very close to the water level. So there's just a lot of things that you want to have a professional look at when you're buying a waterfront property. Now, this one may sound a little bit cliche, but again, it's very, very important. And that is, use a buyer's agent. Now, what that really means is you don't want to use the same agent that's selling the house. Okay? The agent that's selling the house, their job is to get the highest possible price with the best terms for the seller. Now, as a buyer, you want a buyer's agent, because a buyer's agent has your interest in mind and is going to be able to advise you on the value, the fair market value of the property, and also advise you on all the nuances that should be put into your offer, contingencies, so that you don't have surprises down the road. Now, again, a buyer's agent some people think that, okay, if I go to the agent that's listing the property, they'll know the most about it. Okay, and that might be true, but again, their loyalty is to the seller. So if in that case, if a buyer asks the seller's agent, how much do you think this house is worth? The seller's agent can only answer, write an offer for what you think it's worth. The seller's agent has already advised the seller, so they can't advise the buyer. So again, use a buyer's agent. I don't say that just because I'm a realtor. I say that because that's really the best advice you could receive. And the next one is, have realistic expectations about what's happening in the marketplace and what type of a property you could expect to get within your budget. All right. Here's an example. I showed a waterfront property recently, and the folks said that they had been looking for over 10 years to buy a waterfront property. These folks were very diligent. They looked in every nick and cranny of the house and pointed out numerous what they viewed as defects. And in the end, they didn't make an offer because they thought too much was wrong with the property. Now, there was some things wrong with the property, in all honesty, but they could have made an offer, asked to have these things fixed, or they could have made an offer contingent on a home inspection, in which case all the defects would have been pointed out to the buyer. The buyer could then ask to have those defects fixed, and if they weren't fixed, they could get out of the deal. Here's my point. These people just did not have fair expectations within their budget for buying a waterfront property. Now, if they've been looking for over 10 years, they'd obviously missed a lot of fun of owning a waterfront property and a lot of time that they could have fixed any defects a little bit at a time with the property while they were enjoying it. Okay? And they would have had, if they had bought 10 years ago or even 5 years ago, they would have had a huge run-up in the value of the property they purchased, even if it had a few defects. Because again, in the last 2 to 5 years, waterfront properties, many of them have doubled in value. So again, make sure that you have your expectations in line. I can remember 10 years ago when there was 30, 40 houses for sale on the Waupaca chain. Now there's 5 or 6. I would show houses and the people would say, hey, I want to face south. I got to have a sand bottom. I got to walk in. I can't have any weeds. Boom, boom, boom. Now, a lot of folks are just looking at the property and saying, yeah, this is good enough and I'll take it, because they want to get on the water. Okay. So they're not as picky about all the things that might be wrong. What you may want to do when you start looking at waterfront properties is decide, hey, these things have to be with the property for me to move ahead. And these other things I can overlook or I can improve later on or fix or whatever. So again, just have your expectations in line, because you're not going to find the perfect exact waterfront property for what you're looking for. Now, if you say, hey, Steve, find me a property in a subdivision that faces south that has XYZ and PQR granite counters, whatever, chances are we can get pretty close to all your expectations. On the water, probably not so much. Now, the next one is ask for a survey, okay? And a couple quick stories. One buyer that I was handling, the seller's agent was there, and the seller's agent was there, and I was the buyer's agent. And the buyer said, hey, where do you think the property lines are? And the other agent, not myself, said, well, I think it's right here, because see where that tree is and blah, blah, blah. I advised my client to have a survey, which they did, and we found out that the property line was right almost up against the house. There was barely room to walk around the side of the house if you were carrying a cooler without stepping on the neighbor's land. Another one that I did recently, we found that there was an encroachment. The neighbor's garage was a couple feet over onto the subject property, the property that I was selling. We didn't know that, but the buyer was smart enough to ask for a survey. And a foot of land on a waterfront could be worth more than $5,000 a foot. So you want to make sure you ask for a survey. The other reason you want a survey is if you ever want to make any improvements to the property, expand it, add on, whatever, county zoning is going to ask you for a survey. And finally, the last reason that you want a survey is you just want to know where the property lines are with your neighbor. Okay? Not that neighbors are bad or anybody's mean, but it's just good to have an orange flag, a red flag out there that says, hey, here's where the line in the water is, because then everybody knows what's going on. Piers end up in the right place. If there's any expansion or whatever, the survey is there to show the county. So if there has been a survey and you're not 100% sure where the stakes are, ask that the corners be marked. Okay? Now, it's also a good idea, even if there is a survey and there appear to be irons in the ground, okay, on waterfront, it's a good idea to have those corners remarked by a surveyor. In other words, they'll double check and make sure no one moved any of those stakes over the years. Because again, most of the land on lakes was subdivided many, many years ago, and back then they were measuring with chains or tapes, and today they're measuring to a nano inch with GPS and various other electronic methods. So even if there is a survey, it's a good idea to ask for the corners to be marked. If there is not a survey, absolutely positively ask for it. In most cases, a survey can be negotiated so that the seller and the buyer split the cost. Okay, so that one, just don't go without a survey, trust me. Again, Steve Huda with eXp Real Estate. If there's anything else I can do for you, if you have any questions, please be sure to give me a call. And again, if you'd like a printed out, more detailed version of what I just talked about, go to chainvalues with an S.com. That's chainvalues.com. And I'll email you very quickly a full copy of all the details that I've gone over in this recording. Again, thanks.